The crack of a palm against soft skin ripped through courtroom 12B like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The stenographer's fingers froze above the keys. The young lawyer at the defense table dropped her pen. Even the bailiff, Officer Kevin Moore, went rigid, his mouth half open as if words had deserted him. All eyes swung to the front, where Officer Darren Cole loomed over the defendant's chair, his broad hand still raised from the strike. In the chair sat a 15-year-old girl, Aaliyah Brooks, her head turned sharply to the side, cheek already swelling red. A thin line of blood traced down from her split lip. Slowly, she turned back toward him, eyes steady, unblinking, and far older than her years. She raised her cuffed hands just enough to wipe the blood away, then spoke with a calm that was more dangerous than a scream. "That was a mistake," she whispered. Darren Cole smirked, leaning closer, his voice a low growl. "What are you going to do about it, kid? Tell your mommy?" Aaliyah's gaze never wavered. She gave the smallest nod toward the back of the courtroom. "No," she said evenly. "She will." Darren frowned and glanced over his shoulder. The rows of benches were nearly empty during recess, but one woman was standing, no hesitation in her step as she moved down the aisle. Naomi Carter had been sitting silent for hours, her dark blazer blending with the shadows, her notebook open on her lap. Now she walked with deliberate calm, the only sound in the room the echo of her heels on cracked linoleum. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the old clock on the wall still stuck at 2:47, same as it had been for years. She stopped in front of Cole. "Officer Darren Cole," she said, her voice steady as stone. "You're under arrest." But before this moment, the slap, the silence, the reveal, there were hours of waiting, of testimony twisted and discarded, of a girl who should never have been in shackles. Hours earlier, Naomi had been in the same seat, back row, coffee gone cold in a paper cup, pen scratching across the margin of a battered notebook. She was tired, but her eyes never drifted. 6 months of investigation had led her to this place, to this courtroom everyone else avoided. Peeling paint clung to the walls like old scars. The air smelled of mildew. The air conditioning unit had died years ago and was never replaced. They saved this room for the cases no one wanted to see. Poor kids, minorities, people the system had already written off as lost causes. Naomi knew that today was no ordinary trial. This was bait. Evidence would surface here, or it would vanish forever. When the doors creaked open at 2:47 p.m., the bailiff Kevin Moore escorted in a girl who looked far too small for the chains around her wrists. Aaliyah Brooks was 15, barely 5 feet tall, her public school uniform wrinkled from the night she had spent in detention. Her lip was cracked. Bruises ringed her thin wrists. Yet her eyes were sharp. They scanned the room as if memorizing every crack in the ceiling, every scowl on the jury's face, every twitch from the prosecutor. Not frightened, not broken, focused. Naomi had seen hardened witnesses crumble under less pressure, but the teenager walked as if carrying an invisible weight she refused to set down. Kevin Moore eased her into the defendant's chair with more gentleness than Naomi expected. She had been watching him for weeks. Unlike most who worked this courthouse, Moore still carried a trace of conscience in his eyes. "Easy does it, kid," he muttered under his breath as he unlocked her cuffs for the moment. "You okay?" Aaliyah gave a small nod but kept her silence. Naomi opened her file again, scanning the summary she knew by heart. 3 days earlier, on a sidewalk outside Morrison's Grocery on 5th Street, Aaliyah had pulled out her phone. She had seen Officer Darren Cole, a 12-year veteran with 17 complaints on record, confront Samuel Harris, an 82-year-old man with dementia, wandering slowly with a cane. The old man had been lost, confused, searching for the street he had lived on for decades. Someone had called the police about a suspicious figure. Cole arrived fast, barked questions the old man could not process. When Samuel Harris failed to respond, Cole shoved him, hard. Naomi had watched the video, the cane skittering across the pavement, the body of the frail old man crumpling against concrete, blood spreading beneath his head. And in the corner of the frame, Aaliyah's trembling hands holding her phone. Capturing it all, Cole had noticed. He stormed toward her, ordering the video deleted. She had stood her ground, citing her right to record. He slammed her against a car. She refused to drop the phone. By the time backup came, she was in cuffs and he was claiming she had attacked him. Samuel Harris was in the hospital with 12 stitches in his scalp. The video had gone viral in hours, yet the man in uniform faced no charges. Instead, this girl sat accused of disturbing the peace, interfering with police work, resisting arrest. Naomi scanned the bench. Presiding judge, Eleanor Graves, 60, silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. Reputation as tough on crime, which in this district meant siding with law enforcement every time. Prosecutor, Anthony Vega, Harvard graduate, polished, ambitious. He lived for headlines and conviction rates. Opposite him sat Rachel Flores, fresh from law school, drowning in debt, clutching her legal pad as if it might float her above water. The case was rigged before it began. At 3:15 p.m., the gavel struck. Judge Graves called the room to order. Vega's opening statement unfurled smooth as silk. Words like law and order, combative teenager, dangerous interference. He painted Cole as a patient officer protecting a confused old man, Aaliyah as an agitator escalating the scene. Each phrase twisted reality tighter. Naomi scribbled notes. Welfare check, combative, phrases designed for headlines, not truth. Rachel Flores rose trembling. Her voice cracked, but she spoke of a 15-year-old honor student, exercising her right to record police brutality. She called the video undeniable proof, but before the jury could even glimpse it, Graves dismissed the evidence. Lacks authentication, she said flatly, as though dismissing a grocery list. Without the video, Rachel had nothing but her client's word against an officer's. The first witness, Darren Cole. His boots shone, his uniform crisp, his testimony a rehearsed lie. He claimed to have guided Samuel Harris gently, claimed Aaliyah had rushed close, yelling accusations, destabilizing the scene. Each false word was delivered with calm authority. Rachel's cross-examination was shredded by Vega's objections, each sustained by the judge before the question left her lips. Complaints against Cole? Irrelevant? Past excessive force? Inadmissible? The young lawyer was drowning. Naomi clenched her jaw. Then Aaliyah herself took the stand. Her small frame looked swallowed by the witness chair, but her voice was steady. She spoke of an old man shoved, of fear in his eyes, of her decision to record for truth's sake. She admitted to nothing but standing 30 feet away, phone in hand. Her testimony was plain, simple, unadorned, its clarity cutting through the lies like a shard of glass. Yet Vega pounced, cross-examining her for 30 minutes, twisting words, dragging out old social media posts, accusing her of bias. Through it all, she remained composed, answering each question with quiet honesty. When the recess was called at 4:45, Naomi's pen had carved grooves into her notebook pages. She watched Aaliyah sit alone, wrists still cuffed, face unreadable. She watched Darren Cole stride to the water fountain, swagger intact. He leaned down as he passed the girl and muttered poison into her ear. No one else heard the words, but Naomi saw Aaliyah's shoulders tighten, her hands curl into fists. Then Cole turned back, voice loud enough this time. "You don't know your place," he sneered. Aaliyah lifted her chin. "What's my place?" His smirk spread like oil. Quiet, invisible, like you're supposed to be. And then his hand cracked across her face, the strike reverberating through plaster walls and human nerves alike. That was the moment the room froze. That was the moment Naomi Carter stood. That was where this story truly began. The courtroom still hadn't breathed after the slap. The sound lingered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Darren Cole's smirk twisted into confusion as Naomi Carter revealed her badge. The weight of the golden crest gleamed beneath the sick fluorescent lights, shifting the balance of the entire room. A hush spread like a wave across the benches, and for the first time all day, Judge Eleanor Graves' voice faltered. "Agent Carter, this is highly irregular. You can't just—" Naomi cut her off with quiet authority. "With respect, Your Honor, I can, and I just did." Gasps rippled through the few spectators. Rachel Flores, still frozen by her client's humiliation, blinked as though she had stepped into an entirely different trial. Aaliyah Brooks, cheeks burning from the slap, sat silent but straight-backed, eyes fixed on Naomi as though finally someone had stepped between her and the storm. Naomi had not come here to posture. She had come to end this. She slid a folder from inside her blazer, thick with months of documents, witness statements, sealed complaints, internal memos. She laid it carefully on the prosecutor's table in front of Anthony Vega. His hands twitched at his sides, uncertain whether to touch it. "Inside," Naomi said clearly, "you'll find records of 17 citizen complaints against Officer Cole, ignored by this district. You'll also find sealed reports of 32 additional incidents never filed, all involving excessive force against minority residents. Mr. Vega, your office declined to pursue 14 of those cases. Every single one was quietly closed or bargained down to nothing." Anthony Vega's lips parted, but no words came. The mask of confidence, the polished facade he wore in court like armor, cracked. He reached for the folder, but Naomi's hand pressed it shut before he could open it. "Don't bother," she said. "You already know what's inside." Darren Cole's bravado slipped as the two federal agents Naomi had summoned entered through the side door. Their suits were crisp, their movements efficient. They were not here for debate. They were here for arrests. The bailiff Kevin Moore stepped instinctively to the side, eyes darting between Naomi and Cole. For weeks he had suspected something was rotten, but now the stench was undeniable. Judge Graves slammed her gavel, the sound sharp and desperate. "This is my courtroom. I will not have it hijacked by federal theatrics." Naomi turned her gaze on her, steady and cold. "Your courtroom? No. Judge, this belongs to the people. And you've failed them for years." She produced another document, this one a federal warrant stamped with authority higher than Graves' bench could ever reach. Naomi placed it on the desk before her. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation into judicial misconduct and civil rights violations." The judge's face drained of color. She reached for the warrant, her hand trembling. The crowd of reporters who had trickled in for closing arguments now scrambled for better angles. Cameras flashing, they had expected a small trial against a teenager. What they got was a bombshell detonation of systemic corruption. Darren Cole laughed, but there was no humor in it, only a brittle edge of fear. "This is a setup. You can't touch me. You don't get it. I'm the one who keeps these streets safe." His voice rose, echoing against the cracked walls. The federal agent stepped closer. One spoke firmly. "Darren Cole, you're under arrest for assault, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." Cole lashed out, shoving a chair backward, but Kevin Moore intercepted him. For years, the bailiff had swallowed his conscience, obeyed orders, watched injustice unfold, but not today. He grabbed Cole's arm in a practiced move and pinned it behind his back, forcing him to the ground where the agents clicked the cuffs in place. Cole roared, spittle flying. "This is my house. You think you can drag me out of here like some criminal?" Naomi crouched down, her voice low but firm. "No. Officer, you dragged yourself out with every choice you made. Today is just the bill coming due." As Cole was led away, his boots scraping against the dirty tiles, Anthony Vega tried to slip toward the exit. Naomi's voice caught him like a snare. "Don't pack your briefcase too quickly. Counselor, you'll be served with a federal subpoena within 48 hours. Vega froze at the door, shoulders rigid, but he didn't look back. He pushed through the exit, his ambition unraveling behind him. Judge Graves sat stiff, her knuckles white around the gavel she still clutched as though it could anchor her authority. But no one was looking to her anymore. All eyes were on Naomi and the teenager at the defense table. Rachel Flores moved as though waking from a dream. She fumbled for the keys, rushed to Aaliyah's side, and unlocked the cuffs. The heavy metal dropped from her wrist with a clang. Aaliyah rubbed the red grooves, exhaling slowly. She turned to Naomi. "How long were you watching me?" Naomi met her eyes. "6 months. Your video was the spark we needed. But this investigation was never just about you. It was about a system that thought it could silence anyone who dared to tell the truth." Aaliyah's lips quivered, though her voice stayed firm. "So I was bait." Naomi's expression softened for the first time. "You were brave. Brave enough to hold up a phone when every instinct told you to look away. We made sure you were protected." "It didn't feel like protection when he hit me." The girl's words sliced sharper than any accusation. Naomi nodded. "I know, and he'll answer for that. But today, you proved something bigger, that he couldn't break you." The room exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised. Kevin Moore shouted for order. Rachel Flores stood between Aaliyah and the chaos, shielding her with small but determined shoulders. The girl bent to gather her scattered belongings, her notebooks, her pens, the photo of her grandmother. Each item was folded gently into her backpack, as if restoring order to a life others had tried to shred. She looked up once more, eyes clear. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do," she murmured, "is let people show who they really are." Naomi Carter heard the words and felt the weight of them settle over the room. That was no longer a frightened teenager speaking. It was a voice of truth that had survived the system's attempt to bury it, and it was only the beginning. The handcuffs bit into Darren Cole's wrists as the federal agents dragged him toward the side door. He twisted like a cornered animal, shouting about setups, conspiracies, and witch hunts, his voice bouncing off the cracked walls of Courtroom 12B. But his words no longer carried weight. Cameras were rolling now. Reporters who had smelled only a minor trial had caught the scent of blood in the water. Every flash of a camera captured his downfall. An officer who had once strutted through these halls untouchable, now shoved forward like any other criminal. Aaliyah Brooks sat at the defense table, her hands finally free of chains. She watched with quiet intensity, not gloating, not smiling, just watching. Every step Cole took toward the exit carved a permanent memory into her mind. The man who had shoved an old man, the man who had slammed her into a car, the man who had slapped her in open court, was leaving in cuffs. Naomi Carter's gaze shifted from Cole to Judge Eleanor Graves. The judge's face was an ugly canvas of rage and disbelief. Her gavel trembled in her grip as if sheer force could hold back the tide. "Agent Carter, you are exceeding your authority. This circus will end now." Her voice cracked on the last word, desperation bleeding through the veneer of command. Naomi didn't flinch. She stepped toward the bench, her voice calm, her stride deliberate. "Your Honor, for 12 years you have dismissed every civil rights complaint brought before this court. Statistically, the chance of that happening without bias is less than 1 in 10,000. That isn't law. That isn't justice. That is conspiracy." She placed another sealed folder on the bench. Signed affidavits, case dismissals, a pattern of protection for officers like Cole. You will be answering for all of it. Judge Graves' lips pressed into a thin line. She looked down at the folder, but did not open it. The cameras caught the tremor in her jaw, the way her shoulders stiffened. For the first time in years, she was not the most powerful figure in the room. Anthony Vega had slipped back into the gallery after his failed escape, trying to shrink into anonymity. His suit jacket hung askew, his once pristine tie now loosened. Naomi turned to him. "Mr. Vega, your record shows 14 civil rights cases quietly buried under your watch. Victims silenced, officers shielded, families left without justice. You think ambition excuses complicity? Her words were not shouted, but they struck harder than any gavel. Vega's face paled, sweat gathering at his temples. I was following precedent, he muttered weakly. I did what was expected of me. Naomi's reply was ice. And that's exactly the problem. The federal agents, Rodriguez and Kim, stood ready at Naomi's signal. They weren't just here for Cole. This was a sweep, a cleansing, a reset of a courtroom that had rotted from the inside. Naomi addressed the room now, her voice carrying across every bench and corner. This investigation is bigger than one officer, one prosecutor, one judge. It's about a culture that told a 15-year-old girl she was the criminal for daring to hold up a camera. That culture ends today. Reporters scribbled furiously, their cameras clicking nonstop. Kevin Moore, the bailiff who had long stayed silent, stood a little taller now, his voice booming as he ordered the crowd to stay behind the barrier. For the first time, his loyalty was not to the judge on the bench, but to the justice that had walked through the door with Naomi's badge. Aaliyah rose from her chair. She had not been told to. No one instructed her, but she stood anyway, spine straight, eyes locked on Naomi. So this is what it takes, she said softly, almost to herself, for someone to believe me. The words weren't bitter, they were matter of fact, but they carried the quiet ache of someone who had waited too long for the system to see her humanity. Naomi turned toward her, meeting her gaze with the gravity of someone who had seen too many like her, kids whose courage was repaid with punishment. It takes people refusing to look away, Naomi said, and you did that first. Darren Cole's shouts grew distant as the agents pushed him through the door. The echo of his rage faded, replaced by the murmur of the press, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the pounding of hearts that knew history had just cracked open in this dingy courtroom. Judge Graves slammed her gavel again, though it no longer commanded silence. This hearing is adjourned, she barked, her voice shaking. Naomi shook her head. No, Judge, this court is under federal oversight now. You will be escorted from the bench pending investigation. Agent Kim moved forward, not with cuffs, but with the weight of authority. Graves rose stiffly, her robe heavy on her shoulders. She descended the bench slowly, each step measured, but the look in her eyes betrayed her fear. She was no longer untouchable. The moment she was led away, Anthony Vega dropped his briefcase to the floor, the snap of its metal clasp echoing. His voice was hoarse. You don't understand. I never had a choice. It was the system. I played along because if I didn't, I'd be out. Naomi's reply was merciless in its simplicity. Then maybe being out is exactly what you should have chosen. Vega sank back into his chair, defeated. In the chaos, Rachel Flores knelt beside Aaliyah. The lawyer's hand still shook, but her voice steadied. You're free now, she said. The charges are gone. Aaliyah closed her eyes, breathing in the words. Freedom, not as a gift from a judge, not as a bargain from a prosecutor, but wrestled out of the grip of corruption by truth that refused to die. Naomi stepped back to the center of the courtroom. The peeling paint, the broken clock, the scarred wood benches, they all looked the same, but the air felt different, lighter, as if the room itself exhaled after years of holding its breath. She looked around, her voice quieter now but no less firm. This was never about a courtroom. This was about a principle. No one, no matter their badge, their title, or their robe, is above accountability. She turned to Aaliyah. And sometimes, it takes someone everyone else overlooks to remind us of that. For the first time since entering this place, Aaliyah allowed the faintest flicker of a smile. It was not triumph, not victory. It was relief. The kind that comes when the world, for once, doesn't crush you for telling the truth. And as the cameras captured every angle, as reporters prepared their breaking headlines, as federal agents secured their suspects, One thought settled over everyone present. The system had been cracked open, and nothing would ever look quite the same again. The old clock on the wall still read 2:47, as if time itself had refused to move past the moment the truth cracked open. The courtroom was emptying now, agents escorting Judge Graves out the side door, reporters flooding the hallway. Anthony Vega slumped in his chair like a man awaiting judgment. Yet in the middle of it all sat Aaliyah Brooks, a 15-year-old girl with a bruised lip and steady eyes, quietly collecting the scattered pieces of her life from the floor. Her backpack lay open, contents spilled by intimidation earlier in the day. Pencils rolled under benches. Loose-leaf homework was smudged from shoes that had trampled across it. A photograph of her grandmother had bent at the edges. She knelt slowly, not rushing, gathering each thing as if restoring dignity to herself through the ritual. Naomi Carter watched from a few feet away, saying nothing at first. Some truths didn't need commentary. They needed witness. Rachel Flores, still pale from adrenaline, crouched beside her client. "Here, your eraser," she whispered, handing over the small pink block as though it were treasure. Aaliyah smiled faintly, slipping it into her bag. "Thanks." She zipped the backpack shut, then sat back on her heels, looking up at Naomi. "How long did you let me sit there in cuffs?" she asked, her tone neither bitter nor naive. "Before stepping in?" Naomi met her gaze without flinching. "6 months we've been building this case. Your video was the spark, but we needed to see just how far they'd go when they thought no one was watching." Aaliyah's lip quivered. "So I was bait." The words hung heavy, not an accusation, but a truth-seeking weight. Naomi's expression softened. "You were brave. Brave enough to hold up a camera when everyone else looked away. You weren't bait. You were proof. And sometimes proof is the only way to break walls this thick." Aaliyah let that sink in. Her hand brushed the red marks on her wrist. "It didn't feel like proof when he hit me." Naomi stepped closer, crouching until their eyes were level. "I know, and he'll answer for that. What matters is he didn't break you." The girl looked down at her shoes, scuffed from detention. "My grandma always says fighting back just makes it about your anger. Staying calm makes it about theirs." She drew a shaky breath. "I didn't fight back. I made him show who he really was." Naomi felt a rare smile tug at her lips. "Your grandmother is a wise woman." Aaliyah nodded. "She marched in the 60s, civil rights protests. She says every generation has to fight the same battles, just in new ways." Her voice grew stronger. "Maybe holding a phone is my march." The bailiff, Kevin Moore, lingered near the door, listening. For years he had kept his head down, following orders, filing papers, pretending not to hear cries that came from the holding cells. Now, for the first time, he felt shame press against his chest. He cleared his throat. "Kid's right," he muttered, almost to himself. Naomi turned. "Officer Moore, you've seen what this place has done." He shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, too many times. Guess I figured I couldn't change it." Aaliyah stood now, her small frame casting a long shadow under the harsh lights. "You didn't have to change it alone," she said quietly. "You just had to not look away." Moore blinked at her, then lowered his head. The truth from a teenager cut deeper than any lecture. Outside, the courthouse steps boiled with chaos, reporters clamoring for statements, flashing lights painting the dusk in staccato bursts. But inside, the courtroom felt strangely calm, almost sacred in its emptiness. Rachel Flores sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "I thought I lost today," she murmured. Naomi shook her head. "You stood up when it was easier to give in. You believed your client even when the system told you not to. That matters." Rachel let out a shaky laugh. "Didn't feel like it mattered. I couldn't get a single objection through. I was useless." "No," Naomi said firmly. "You were necessary. You showed her she wasn't alone. You kept fighting even when the rules were stacked. That's not useless. That's courage." The young lawyer wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. Courage looked different on everyone. On Rachel, it was standing on shaking legs with no chance of winning. On Naomi, it was walking into enemy territory with a badge no one knew she carried. And on Aaliyah, it was silence. Steady, defiant silence in the face of a hand that tried to erase her. Aaliyah slung her backpack over one shoulder. She glanced once more at the bench where Judge Graves had sat, now empty, the gavel abandoned. "Will it change?" she asked softly. Naomi followed her gaze. "It already has. Federal oversight's coming. New judges, new prosecutors, new rules, body cameras, transparency. This courthouse won't be the same." Aaliyah's lips pressed into a line. Good, because what it wasn't justice. They walked toward the exit together, Naomi, Rachel, and Aaliyah, passing rows of benches that had witnessed years of silent injustice. Each step felt like leaving a tomb behind. At the doorway, Naomi paused. "Aaliyah," she said, "you understand something most people take years to learn. Justice doesn't just live in courtrooms. It lives in people refusing to look away." The girl's eyes softened, but her voice stayed strong. "Then I guess I'll keep looking." When they pushed open the heavy doors, the roar of reporters crashed over them like a wave. Microphones thrust forward. Questions shouted. Cameras blinding. Naomi raised a hand, shielding Aaliyah. "No statements," she barked to the crowd. "The investigation is ongoing." But the cameras had already captured what they needed. The image of a girl walking free, head high, beside the federal agent who believed her. Far above the courthouse steps, the sky bled into twilight. For Aaliyah Brooks, the day had ended with bruises on her skin and a scar she would carry forever. But she also carried something else now. Proof that even against walls stacked high with power and lies, a single act of courage could shake the ground. And as Naomi guided her down the steps, flashes exploding all around, the girl whispered just loud enough for the agent to hear, "He thought he could silence me with a slap, but all he did was give me a voice louder than his badge." Naomi glanced at her, pride glinting in her eyes. "And that voice," she said, "isn't going away." 3 weeks later, a small package arrived on Naomi Carter's desk at the FBI field office in downtown. She almost missed it, buried beneath case files, subpoenas, and daily reports that piled like bricks on her schedule. The return label was handwritten in careful block letters. From Aaliyah Brooks. Naomi set aside the paperwork and opened it. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping and a letter on lined notebook paper, the kind you'd find in a high school backpack. The clipping's headline read, "Federal Probe Rocks District Court. Judge suspended. Prosecutor resigns. Officer sentenced." Beneath the headline was a photo of Darren Cole in handcuffs, eyes wild as agents shoved him into a black SUV. The article recounted the charges: civil rights violations, obstruction, conspiracy. Judge Eleanor Graves suspended pending ethics trial. Prosecutor Anthony Vega under investigation. Reputation shattered. It was the kind of victory headline that most agents only dreamed of. But Naomi's eyes didn't linger there. They drifted to the smaller column beneath it. Local teen returns to school after courthouse ordeal. The article was brief. It described how a 15-year-old honor student had quietly resumed classes, attending homeroom, doing homework, and even joining a new study group. The last line made Naomi pause. When asked what she plans to do next, Brooks replied, "My homework, just like any other kid." She smiled, then unfolded the letter. "Dear Agent Carter, thank you for everything you did. I visited Mr. Harris and his family last weekend. He's healing. His daughter says he doesn't remember much about that day, which might be a blessing. He smiled a lot, though. He's kind. I thought you'd want to know. School is different now. Some kids look at me strange. Some avoid me, but most are nicer than I expected. A few asked me to help with a project about civil rights. I said yes. My social studies teacher even showed our class your press conference. She said, This is what it looks like when the system works because people don't give up. I've been thinking about my future. I think I want to be a lawyer. Not the kind who just takes cases for money, the kind who fights cases that matter. My grandma says I should write and ask if you think that's a good idea. What do you think? Your friend. Naomi leaned back in her chair, the letter trembling faintly in her hand. In all the noise, the trials, the subpoenas, the reforms, this quiet note was what mattered most. She picked up her phone and dialed the number scribbled at the bottom of the page. Hello, a familiar voice answered, tentative but steady. Aaliyah, it's Agent Carter. I got your letter. Oh, relief softened the girl's tone. I wasn't sure you'd have time. I'll always have time for letters from friends, Naomi said. She paused and then added, and yes, I think you'd make an excellent lawyer. The kind who takes cases that matter. There was a small intake of breath on the other end. Really, you think so? I know so, Naomi replied. You've already proven the most important quality a lawyer can have. What's that? The courage to stand up for what's right, even when you stand alone. The line went quiet. Then Aaliyah whispered, do you think what happened to me will happen to other kids? Naomi stared at the skyline outside her office window. I hope not. But if it does, I hope they remember your example. That one voice, one camera, one act of truth can change everything. I hope so too, Aaliyah said. Months passed. Darren Cole was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Judge Graves lost her robe and her license. Anthony Vega resigned in disgrace, stripped of his ambitions. The courthouse itself underwent sweeping reforms, mandatory body cameras, external oversight, new leadership sworn to transparency. But the real story didn't live in the reforms. It lived in the choices of one teenager who had refused to look away. 6 months later, Naomi sat in the bleachers of a high school gymnasium draped in banners. The air buzzed with the chatter of parents and the smell of fresh carnations. Aaliyah Brooks, wearing a cap and gown slightly too large for her frame, stepped to the podium as valedictorian. Her voice carried across the gym. Sometimes people ask me if I regret pulling out my phone that day. If I regret everything that happened after, the answer is no, because staying silent in the face of injustice doesn't make you safe, it makes you complicit. The crowd rose to its feet, applause crashing like thunder. Parents wiped tears, students cheered. Even teachers who had once whispered doubts clapped until their hands stung. Naomi found herself standing too, clapping harder than she realized, pride welling in her chest. After the ceremony, amid hugs and photographs, Aaliyah spotted Naomi. She ran forward, cap slipping, and embraced her. You came. I wouldn't miss it, Naomi said. My grandma says I'm following her footsteps, Aaliyah whispered. She marched in the 60s. She told me every generation has to fight the same battles in new ways. She says I should thank you for proving the system can still work when the right people are paying attention. Naomi's eyes softened. The system works when people like you refuse to let it fail. As the crowd thinned and twilight bathed the gymnasium in gold, Naomi watched Aaliyah laugh with friends, pose for photos, clutch her diploma like a key to the future. This girl had been painted as a criminal, shackled in a broken courtroom. Now she stood tall, already shaping a path toward defending others who would need her voice. Naomi knew the world was still messy, still unfair, still dangerous. But watching Aaliyah, she also knew something else. Change had already begun. And it had begun with a 15-year-old girl holding up a phone and refusing to look away. If one teenager with a phone can change everything, imagine what all of us can do when we refuse to stay silent. Don't just watch. Be part of the change. Share this story. Leave your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories that remind us. Courage is contagious.